What I'd like to do at this point is I'd like to honor everyone in this room that has served our country. So anyone who has served our country in the military or in any form or fashion, please stand for a moment so we can honor you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. You know, first off, I want to do a welcome to our church family up in Elahi. So I just want to welcome you guys here this morning. You guys may know that we have a whole group that meets every Sunday up there and joins us here at church. You know, my dad served as a staff sergeant under General Patton. He led a platoon from North Africa across Europe, and eventually 3 years later, winding up in Dachau. My dad made it home, but others didn't, paying the ultimate price for freedom. As you drive around America today, you can find memories to our heroes everywhere. I would like to share a story about one of them this morning with you. You know, World War II produced many heroes. One such man was Lieutenant Commander Butch O'Hare. He was a fighter pilot assigned to the aircraft carrier Lexington in the South Pacific. One day, his entire squadron was sent out on a mission. After he was airborne, he looked at his fuel gauge and he realized that someone had forgotten actually to top off the tank. He wouldn't have enough fuel to make it there and back. So his flight leader said, well, you better come on back. Well, he dropped out of formation, headed back to the fleet. And as the story goes, as he was returning to the mothership, he saw something that turned his blood cold. A squadron of Japanese aircraft were speeding their way towards the American fleet. There was only one thing he could do. He must somehow divert them from the fleet. Laying aside all thoughts of personal safety, he dove into the formation of those Japanese planes. Wing-mounted .50 calibers blazed as he charged in, attacking one surprised enemy plane after another. Butch rove in and out of the now broken formation and fired as many planes as he possibly could until his ammunition ran out. Undaunted, he continued the assault. He dove at the planes, trying to clip a wing or tail, doing something in hopes that would knock off a few more of these enemy planes. Finally, exasperated, the Japanese squadron took off in another direction. Deeply relieved, Butch O'Hare and his tattered fighter limped back to the carrier. Upon arrival, he reported in and related the event surrounding his return. The film from the gun camera mounted on his plane told the tale. It showed that Butch extended a daring attempt to protect the fleet. He had, in fact, destroyed 5 enemy aircraft. This took place February 20th, 1942. And for his action, Butch became the first Navy's ace of World War II and the first naval aviator to win the Congressional Medal of Honor. A year later, Butch was killed in an aerial combat at the age of 29. His hometown, though, would not allow the memory of this World War II hero to fade, and that's why you have O'Hare Airport in Chicago, named to the tribute and the courage of him. Butch O'Hare, as you know, was one of hundreds of thousands of men and women who have stood in the gap for our freedom and tyranny and have given their life for it. In March 1775, Patrick Henry was at the Second Virginia Convention, and he made a motion that the Virginia forms a standing army to fight in the Revolutionary War. In his speech to the other elected officials, he said this famous line, "I know not what course others may take, but as for me, give me liberty or give me death." I believe that's the heart of all of our heroes who have died for our country ever since. These men and women who have stood in the gap between liberty and tyranny. Tomorrow is officially designated as the holiday marked in many communities by a variety of solemn observances. All across the United States, people will gather in parks, cemeteries, to commemorate what this day symbolizes. Bands are going to play, speeches are going to be given, prayers will be offered up to God, taps will be played, guns fired as a salute to those whom our nation remembers. From Valley Forge to Berlin, from San Juan Hill to Heartbreak Ridge, from Iwo Jima to Saigon, Desert Storm to Fallujah, the blood of American soldiers is permanently mingled with the soil of 4 continents and hundreds of islands. Memorial Day is our attempt to remember and say thank you to those who gave their best and all they had that we might continue to enjoy the liberties that we have here today in this country. A little history I thought I would share for all of us here. You know, our present day celebration, do you know when this started, this whole Memorial Day? It came out of the Civil War. In 1865, shortly after the close of the war, some women in Vicksburg, Mississippi, chose May 30th as a day to place flowers upon the graves of the war dead. The practice of choosing a special day to decorate the graves of the war dead soon spread from the north to the south. And it was actually called Decoration Day. In 1868, a group of women in Washington, D.C., they asked permission of the War Department to decorate the graves at Arlington National Cemetery and to be allowed to have a special memorial service. After a lot of discussion, permission was granted, but the officials attached a harsh provision. No flowers were to be placed on the graves of the Confederate soldiers who were buried in a separate section of the cemetery. The ladies, well, they finally agreed, and they planned their program. General James Garfield, a devout Christian who later became President of the United States, delivered the memorial speech. And in accordance with their agreement, flowers were placed only on the graves of the Union dead, not on the graves of the Confederate. But after the crowds were gone, a strong wind blew almost all the flowers over onto the Confederate graves. When that became known, many people believed it was a direct result of God's intervention. After that, the order was not to ignore the Confederate graves ever again. Now it's called Memorial Day. It's observed as a day to honor all the fallen, from all our nation wars, a time when our country just pauses to remember those who made the ultimate sacrifice. We owe them, obviously, and all those who served with them far more, right, than we can ever realize. The key to Memorial Day is to remember. And the author from the book of Hebrews, he calls us in chapter 12, he tells us, listen, you got to remember you're surrounded here by witnesses. This is what he says in Hebrews 12, 1 and 2. And the very first word I want you to catch is called therefore. He says, therefore, since we also have such a great cloud of witnesses surrounding us, let's rid ourselves of every obstacle and the sin which so easily entangles us. Let's run with the endurance the race that's set before us, looking only at Jesus. He's the originator and the perfecter of the faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and he sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. The reason I wanted to pause at that word therefore. Therefore, the apostle is intentionally calling our attention back to the heroes of our faith. You know, in chapter 11 of Hebrews, it's known as the Great Faith chapter. So I want to take a look at some of these names and some of these people. You know, Paul is asking us, let's remember people like Abel and Enoch and Noah and Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Joseph and Moses and Rahab. And he goes on and on and on and on until we get to Hebrews 11:32 to 34. And what more shall I say? For time's going to fail me if I tell you of Gideon and Barak and Samson, Jephthah, of David, Samuel, prophets, who by faith conquered kingdoms, performed acts of righteousness, obtained promises, shut the mouths of lions, quenched the power of fire, escaped the edge of the sword. From weakness they were made strong. They became mighty in war, put foreign armies to flight. Friends, let me tell you something. Many of these people were just ordinary individuals of faith, but God used them in extraordinary ways to accomplish his will. You see, God makes a habit of doing the impossible through people just like you and me. Don't miss this. I mean, if you're new here, I'll give you a few don't miss this, and this is, if you fall asleep somewhere in between, I want you to remember these. I want you to really grasp this. The secret of living a life that makes a difference, it really is realizing that it's not what you do for yourself, but it's what you allow God to do through you to others. Oh, let me say that again. The secret of really living a life that makes a difference today, whatever time you have left, no matter what stage of life you're at, it's not about you. It's about allowing God to work through you to make a difference in other people's lives. Like all the heroes we just talked about, heroes in America, the miracles in Scripture. This is how we make a difference, a lasting impact. So this morning, on the eve of Memorial Day, I want to talk a little bit about the early history of our nation that I am convinced right now, especially the younger people, they don't know any of this. And here are some things that I think are worth knowing about the roots of this nation and what's right with America. America was founded by men and women who acknowledged God's supreme rule over men and nations. And believe me, they weren't perfect. They weren't all devout Christians, but they all acknowledged that God was the supreme ruler over men and over nations. Sometimes you ought to read the Independence, the Declaration of Independence again, because I know most of you are familiar with this because you had to probably memorize this. They probably don't do that anymore in school, but you had to memorize the prologue. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. They're saying we want to form a government whose job is to protect what the Creator has given to each and every one of us. Then after listing 15 or 16 charges against the king, they make two more references to God. They said, "We, therefore, the representatives of the United States of America in General Congress assembled." And listen to this this is what they said. They said, "and appealing to the supreme judge of the world." In the Declaration of Independence, they're saying that God is the supreme judge of the world. And then they end this declaration with these words: "And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, our sacred honor." The First Continental Congress was deadlocked, discussing and debating the words of this declaration. Finally, it was suggested, when you hear this, that they all get on their knees and ask God what should be done. According to history, all 55 of the signers of the Declaration of Independence went to their knees as one man and began to pray and seek the wisdom and guidance of God. Wouldn't it be wonderful if today our president, our Congress, our Supreme Court, if they would just get down on their knees like their forefathers did and just say, "God, what do you want us to do for this nation?" You know, in Ezekiel 22:30, he writes that God is looking for someone who's going to stand up in the gap, someone who's going to do what's right. He said, God says, "I searched for a man among them who would build up a wall and stand in the gap before me for the land so that I wouldn't destroy it. I didn't find anyone." God said, "I didn't find anybody." The people of Israel had turned away from God. This is important to grasp this, everyone. They'd become a people of sin and depravity. They had enjoyed freedom, peace, as long as they were living and being the nation that God had intended them to be. God said he could find no one. No one. God had given them their freedom from bondage from Egypt. He brought them safely through the desert into the land flowing with milk and honey, as they had squandered the rights that God had given them, and he was taking his hand of protection off of them. All because no one would stand up for what was right, what's true, what's just. No one. The nation of Israel and Judea were both eventually defeated, sent into exile in other nations. All this happened. No one was willing to stand up. Friends, while we honor our heroes for protecting our liberties, which include our religious freedoms, we are in need of people who will stand in the gap for our Christian faith. We're in need. Friends, we don't want to go down the same path of destruction as the Israelites walked. We don't want to walk down that path. If we do not have brave individuals who are willing to stand in the gap and fight for our faith, our future in this country is very unwelcoming. Have you noticed? We were founded on the principles of freedom of religion that were derived from God and from the Bible. So don't miss this. We get our freedom from God. This is where our inalienable rights come from. They don't come from the government. I hope you heard me. We get our freedom from God. We don't get our freedom from this government. We are becoming so concerned that we don't offend anyone that we're letting our faith get trampled under the guise of tolerance. That's what's happening. Friends, we need some heroes. Stand in the gap to model the Christian faith and be prepared to defend it. The Apostle Peter tells us, he goes, this is how you do it. Peter writes, but even if you should suffer for the sake of righteousness, you are blessed. And do not fear their intimidation. Don't be in dread. Be courageous. Peter's saying, be courageous. Look, don't fear this. We should not be afraid of threats from unbelievers, but to be strong, to be courageous. 1 Peter 3:15 says this, but sanctify Christ as Lord in your hearts, always being ready to make a defense for everyone who asks you to give an account for this hope that you have. But here's the key. This is where we mess up. Do it with gentleness. Do it with respect. This doesn't work. It doesn't work. You do it with gentleness. You do it with respect. Tell them about God if you have to. If you got to use words, then that's what you do. Hopefully your actions show who God is and him working through you. You know, there was this little boy who was drawing a picture. He's in kindergarten. And the teacher asked him, what are you drawing? He says, well, he was drawing a picture of God. And the kindergarten teacher said, no one knows what God looks like. And the little boy says, they will when I'm done. Friends, it's another don't miss this. Share Jesus with people so that when you're finished, they will know and understand who he is. Share in a way they'll understand who he truly is through your example, living through you. Share your faith of hope, as Peter stated. There may be a price, for standing there and doing that. Some are not going to accept what you tell them. Some may even ridicule you. Try and maybe hurt you in some way. But look how Peter ends this section here. 1 Peter 3:17. For it's better if God should will it so that you suffer for doing what is right, rather than doing what is wrong. Yes, and I have another don't miss this. Our military, it stands in the gap for our freedoms right here in this country. And we got to stand in the gap for our faith in this country and around the world. Tomorrow, remember those who have sacrificed their lives. Will you, for our freedom? Always remember the one, though, who sacrificed his life for our salvation. We must be strong. We need to stand in the gap and defend what we know to be true. So in close, friends, I know I'm loaded with don't miss this. I could write a book. We never forget this. We get our freedom from God. Our independence comes from our dependence on him. Our independence comes from our dependence upon him. You understand from this that the only reason this country's here is because of him. The only reason that Declaration of Independence is written the way it is and it's stood for so long is because of him. His guidance, his directions, his influence on his people. He developed this country to be this wonderful place of refuge. So I'm going to leave you with a short piece of history that I don't think you know. Do you know what the tallest structure, first off, is in Washington, D.C.? Yeah, that's right. It's the Washington Monument. And did you know by law nothing taller than the Washington Monument can be built? Do you know what's inscribed at the pinnacle of it? At the very pinnacle of it? Let God be praised. Did you know that? The very top of the Washington Monument, inscribed, let God be praised. I'm going to tell you, I bet you there's legislators who don't know that. There might even be presidents that don't know that. There may be Supreme Court justices that don't know that. But at that very top, at the pinnacle of the nation's capital, let God be praised. America, on this Memorial Day, lift up your eyes and praise God for the greatness and the blessings of this country in which we live. And let me tell you, as I get ready to close here and be able to finally hear, if we really want to see hearts set free, our children, our grandkids, our neighbors, people we golf with, whatever, if we want to see these walls that are blocking people from seeing who God is, and we want our land healed, if we want to see a change in the world, it's got to start right here. It's got to start right now. We're the people who are called by his name. You're his kids. If we'll surrender our pride and turn from our ways, he'll hear us. He'll forgive our sin. He will heal our land. And can I tell you, it starts right here today. I want to share this video with you, our closing video, then I'm going to close this in prayer.